And we are live. Um, Hello, everyone. Hello to our listeners and all people who are watching our YouTube channel. And today we have a very special guest. This lady is actually supposed to be on May 19th, but due to the circumstances and some technical issue, unfortunately, we were not able, to make it happen. And thanks God, she actually was able to find a little time spot for Human Brain Expo, and she's presenting her work today. So today we're talking to scientists. Um, she's PhD, amazing woman, Fatemeh Khatami. She's currently is associate professor at University of Pacifica at Department of Bioengineering. So she has a lot of amazing knowledge regarding audiology system that she's going to share with us. So I will, Fatima, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for making it. Thank you so much for making it happen.
Thank you so much, Gina, for having me. And sorry that I couldn't be able to present it in the day of the Human Brain Expo. So thank you for having me.
Okay, so I will um, now I will just turn all the attention to you, and you will have your time to present your work. Let me remove myself.
So thank you everyone for having me. Today I'm going to talk about the neural coding and models for natural sounds recognition. So how sound is encoded in the brain, it's very important to understand how that happened and how are different types of the sound encoded. Actually, it's very important. Before starting, that would be great to actually categorize the sounds that we have, the natural sounds. So in first category, we can have speech and vocalization that people are communicating with each other, or also animals are communicating with each other using vocalizations. On the other hand, we have some sounds such as the environmental sounds, such as the water and fire. These types of the sounds are our environment, and the characteristics of them are different from the speech and vocalization. I'm going to talk about the characteristic of these different type of the sounds. So if you look at the role of acoustic variability in natural sound recognition, on one hand, we have the word and the speech, like what you have been seeing here, so like the word variability, that I put some information here, a spectrotemporal pattern of different words such as 0, 6, and 7. So you can see the time frequency pattern of different words, and all of them are different from each other. So just by looking at it and analyzing it, we can actually categorize this kind of words. Also, we have another variability for the sounds, like different subjects. If I'm talking or other person is talking different words, there are a slight difference between these patterns, time frequency patterns that you can see here. But actually, in general, when we look at word of zero, almost they are similar. On the other hand, if we look at some natural sounds like the water sounds from the different resources, the brain can actually categorize the water sound very well. But when we look at the spectrotemporal pattern or time frequency features of the water sound from just different resources, as you can see here, it seems very different from each other. Some of them has the middle frequencies intensity, the other one has the higher frequency intensity. So we may probably look at these different sounds and categorize these sounds differently, different than the word. So just categorizing the sounds that we have, we can have a deterministic sound recognition, such as the speech and recognition. So brain is able to recognize sound using a reliable deterministic response pattern. And the challenges that we have usually is the background noise. I'm going to explain it in more details. And then we have a statistical sound recognition, such as the water and environmental sound identification. Deterministic patterns are not available in the spectrogram of this type of the sound, and the brain needs actually to infer some other features, such as statistical regulatories to do that. So the challenge that we have, the sound from different resources has different spectrogram, and we need to extract some other type of the information to categorize the sound. So the first part, I'm going to talk about the deterministic sound recognition and the challenges that we have. So the famous problem that are existed is the cocktail party problem. Hearing a sound of interest, often a speech signal in the sort of the complex auditory setting or actually high background noise. Uh, when you are in a party talking with the other person, there are a lot of background noise, but human and the human brain, our brain actually can recognize and categorize the words and the sounds very well, and we can understand the other person who is in the meeting, although there are a lot of background noise. So challenges of sound recognition in the presence of the background noises existed. A speech signal of interest can be unclear in presence of the background noise. In the first figure, you can see the spectrotemporal pattern of the one sentences that the person is taught, and you can see actually the common cues of the speech on that. This research was done by the group in the MIT. And when the other person is talking, actually some speech cues are masked by the additional talker. So masking of the target by the other sound can make it very hard to actually categorize or understand or distinguish it. So in spite of the potential masking, human can discriminate speech in the presence of the noise very well. But some technologies, ASR, automatic speech recognition, if there are some background sounds, it's make it very harder to actually recognize the sound or speech that you talk or the speech. So look at some other research that look at the children with a normal hearing. Normal hearing and some hearing loss, you can see that you can see the accuracy actually in the y-axis and also the signal to noise ratio on the x-axis. And you can see that when it is quiet, children can recognize the word very clearly. By actually adding more noise and decreasing SNR ratio, the categorization it's very decreased, but not dropped a lot, around 60%. So what properties of the brain and auditory system can contribute to sound recognition in presence of noise? So look at the auditory system and auditory pathway. We can focus on the role of auditory pathway organization and transformation in sound recognition. When the sound reaches our ear, goes through the ear canal and reach the eardrum, and then tiny bones actually vibrated and send the information to the cochlea, and the cochlea actually send this information to the auditory nerve. Then the information in auditory nerve pass through different layer of the brain and different nuclei. Go from the cochlear nucleus to superior olive nucleus of lateral, and also inferior colliculus, thalamus, and auditory cortex at the end. It has been shown that some features of the sound actually is and information change during this auditory model pathway. So as you can see here, bass modulation frequency in hertz actually increase from the cochlear nucleus to the auditory cortex. So auditory pathway is a hierarchy and organized into 6 principal stages. The model that we want to propose, we are thinking that we have 6 different layers started from the cochlear nucleus to the auditory cortex. And it has been shown in animal models that that integration time in auditory nerve actually gradually increase when it reaches to the auditory cortex. And spectrum bandwidth actually increases slightly from auditory nerve to the auditory cortex. So in cochlear nucleus, we have higher temporal resolution versus in auditory cortex, we have lower temporal resolution. And we have higher spectral resolution in cochlear nucleus compared to the auditory cortex, which is slightly which we have a slightly lower spectral resolution in auditory cortex. So how do functional properties such as integration time, such as integration bandwidth, these functional properties of auditory system affect word recognition in presence of the background noise? So we hypothesize that hierarchical organization of auditory system is necessary to improve sound recognition in the presence of the challenging background noise. So our proposed model, which is published in PlosComputational Biology, is like this. So we have a signal, sound signal, that go through the cochlear model, decompose it to the different frequency in the time, and then we have a spectrotemporal pattern that we feed it to the auditory pathway model that we have 6 different layers of neurons, because we have 6 different layers from the auditory nerve to the auditory cortex. And the output of this model is a spike pattern, like what we actually notice in the brain, and then neurons responses usually. And then these spike patterns will be classified using Bayesian classifier. So look at individual neurons that we have in auditory pathway model. Each neuron is the integrated and fire neuron with a spiking output. We have the 53 excitatory and 53 inhibitory neurons per layer that we selected based on the frequency range of the input sound. And Gaussian and co-tuned excitatory and inhibitory connection weights between the layers. So we have the Gaussian, as you can see here in the figure, co-tuned excitatory and inhibitory connection that weighted the output of each layers. 2 network parameters we have. One is connectivity bandwidth. So the bandwidth can be changed from one layer to the other layer, and it is the hierarchical actually change, and also the time constant, as you can see here in this figure that we showed for excitatory and inhibitory postsynaptic the postsynaptic neurons. And the input of each layer is this, just the spikes. We are weighting them with some connectivity bandwidth, and it will be integrated in integrated fire neurons, and then goes to the next layer. And it will be continued for 6 layers. So this computational model, we develop multi-layer computational auditory network model, but it is inspired by biological parameters. So these biological parameters is the time constant and connectivity bandwidth change, which is changed systematically from one layer to the other layer, and then train auditory pathway model for optimal word recognition, and use challenging background noise, babble noise. So based on this model, we presented 2 scenarios. One, it's the optimal network for speech recognition. So time constant and connectivity bandwidth are found by optimizing a network to have the higher accuracy of the system for the word recognition. And then we have a high resolution network, which time constant is actually constant. We are not changing from one layer to the other layer. And also connectivity bandwidth, which is the constant one. Again, it's constant. So the idea of the high resolution network is that what happens if we keep all the information that we have? Does it lead to the better performance of the network or no? So actually, we will see that keeping all information doesn't lead to a better performance or the word recognition. So auditory, in this model, we have 10 alternative forced choice word recognition tasks using the digits. So we have 10 digits, 0 to 9. And these digits are actually talk with 8 talkers actually pronounce that, and in presence of the babble noise. And the network parameters that we have is the time constant and connectivity bandwidth. So we optimized actually the network to have a higher or maximize the word recognition accuracy. So then as I mentioned, we have 2 networks. One optimal network, which is the optimized for higher accuracy. So as you can see here, in the first layer, I just showed 2 frequencies, 1.8 kilohertz and 3 kilohertz, actually the neuron related to the 10 kilohertz. And the time and the integration time and bandwidth, connectivity bandwidth actually is calculated for this layer. And do the same for the other layers. And then we can have what happened for different layers. So integration time increase from the first layer, which is a kind of analogous to the auditory nerve, to the last layer, which is analogous a kind of to the auditory cortex. And so integration time increase, temporal resolution actually decrease. And then we have for the bandwidth. So look at the bandwidth. Bandwidth also slightly increased from the one layer to the other layer. So spectral resolution decreased. Do the same measurements for the receptive fields for the high resolution network, which we aim to keep the time constant and bandwidth almost constant across the layers. So if you look at different layers and the measurements that we have, integration time, it's almost constant across the layers, and bandwidth slightly increase. So what we are saying here, temporal resolution is almost constant across the layers, and spectral resolution slightly decreased for the high resolution network. So that would be nice to compare the optimal and high resolution networks in terms of the information that they transfer and also word accuracy, average word accuracy that we have. So if you look at the blue one is for optimal network and the red one is for the high resolution network. For high resolution network, the amount of information transferred from one layer to the other layer is almost constant. But for optimal network, the amount of information after usually a layer 4, it decreased significantly. So we will have less information bit per second in last layer compared to the first layer. It is interesting to look at the average word accuracy for these two networks. So usually if we think, we may say keeping information is very good, but actually for word recognition, specifically in presence of the background noise, we notice that not all of the information, it's the information that we would like, and some of them actually it's related to the noise. So if you look at the high resolution network, although the information or bit per second is constant, but actually the accuracy dropped a lot for the average word recognition. On the other hand, if we look at the optimal network, we can see that although the information dropped across the layers, the word accuracy actually increased. It means that the network picked the important information, not the noise that we are not interested in. So the optimal network, actually the average word accuracy increased a lot. So degrading in temporal and spectral resolution is necessary for better word recognition. So we have optimal network versus the auditory system. Optimal network mimics auditory pathway trends. On top, you can see the responses of our model for 6 different layers. And below, you can see the responses of auditory system for animal model from auditory nerve to the cortex. As you can see here, temporal for the auditory system, temporal resolution actually increase, temporal resolution decrease, and integration time increase. And for model, actually same thing happened. So the optimal network mimics the auditory pathway trend. And it seems optimal network is discarding sound information not required for the word recognition, which is something that's desirable. And also comparing the performance of optimized network is very similar to the human performance that we had from the previous researchers. So if you look at the optimal network, which is in the black one, when we have 20 dB SNR, the actual accuracy rate is around 90-95%. When we add more noise, actually the accuracy dropped, but not very significantly for 10 and 5 dB. And also for -5 dB, we still have a good recognition above 60% that we also noticed for from different the results from different research. So as a summary for this part, optimal hierarchy network mirrors auditory pathway trend. Word recognition improves while information transmission degrades across layers, which is mimicking the auditory pathway. And performance of optimized network has very similar to the trend to the human performance. So now that we wrap up the first part for deterministic sounds, Uh, it's good to look at the environmental sounds like the fire and water that we talk about it, and we showed that the spectral temporal frequency parameters is not consistent for example, for water sound from different resources. So how we can analyze this type of the signal? So in second part, I'm talking about statistical sound recognition, role of sound statistics on neural responses in midbrain and its contribution to the sound categorization. So as a background, a great job was done by an MIT group that they look at the high order statistical features in the cochlear representation of sounds, and they found these statistical features are critical for recognition and identification of the sound. As you can see here, if they synthesize the sound again only using the power, the sound actually the words can be categorized by 40%, but when more statistics added to the synthesized sound, then the actually you can see the improvement in the accuracy or percent of the current, very close to the original sounds. So in this part of the project, we synthesize sound based on the extracted features. Sounds were decomposed using a cochlear model, extraction of a statistical feature from the sound, a spectrogram such as the spectrum, correlation, and modulation spectrum. We extracted this type of the feature from the sound and actually use to synthesize the sound based on these these statistical feature. And statistics are used to generate a synthetic variant of the sound. Here you can look at the cochlear model, which represents and how we can actually extract the some sound statistics from the spectrogram. So the waveform, the sound, goes through the cochlear model and decomposes to the different frequency. And here you can see time frequency pattern of the sound. And in the cochlear model, we use the filter bank from the and also envelope to extract the information from the sound. And here the correlation matrix is calculated for these different frequencies, and we can see the correlation of different frequencies here. So in this study, we selected 4 different sounds, five different sounds, fire, bird, water, snake, and the population. And cochleogram of them are actually presented here. So just from the cochleogram, it is not easy, for example, to differentiate between the snake sound and bird sound. Both of them has the high frequency components, and it's not easy to differentiate from them. But actually, if we calculate the correlation matrix, as I showed you before in the previous slide, the correlation matrix is calculated for all of the sounds that we have, and you can see the correlation matrix for the bird and a snake are very different. And also modulation spectrum is calculated from the cochleogram. So these features are different from one natural sound to the other natural sound. So the hypothesis that we have, sound statistics affect not only on human performance, but also affect neural responses and are important for sound recognition. So a statistical feature in neural recording, we have 5 different sounds: fire, bird, crowd, water, and a snake. We had recording at auditory midbrain, inferior colliculus, and also multi-channel recordings using the 16-channel neural nexus on awake rabbit. The question may appear that why we select a rabbit to do that. First of all, we can record rabbit while the rabbit is actually awake. So rabbit can sit still, and then we can have a recording from the rabbit. The other reason that we selected the rabbit is that the lower range of frequency, the lower range of the hearing of the rabbit is actually overlap the higher range of the frequency of the human. So we can have actually, we can use this to hopefully later generalize it to what happened for the human hearing the different sound, specifically natural sound. So on the right side, you can see the model of inferior colliculus. So we have recording in inferior colliculus. So inferior colliculus has a tonotopic range of the frequency. It means that the neurons on top, here, that we showed with the blue responses to the frequency, to the lower frequencies versus below, where it corresponds to the red colors, responds to the higher frequencies. So inferior colliculus actually is arranged or organized tonotypically in terms of response to the sounds, a different frequency of the sound. So also you can see here the responses of inferior colliculus that the upper channels has more responses to the lower frequency versus the lower channels or deeper channels actually have the responses to the higher frequencies. So frequency response areas in central nucleus increasing tonotypically. So we select the area with the tonotypically frequency response that we also use that for the recording. So and the statistics that we use to synthesize the sound is a spectrum, envelope marginals, modulation spectrum, and correlation structure. So we use the model to actually synthesize the sound, and we played both synthesized sound and original sounds to the rabbit, and simultaneously have recording from inferior colliculus. So these are different sounds, synthesized sounds and the original sounds for different natural sounds that we have. And as a measure, then we have measurement in the different part of the inferior colliculus as the 16 channels, as you can see here. So the responses, you can see the spike responses that we have. We calculate the correlation coefficients of these responses, and we compare these correlation coefficient pattern actually to categorize the sound. So the response correlation is used as a measure of the population response statistics to each sound. So we play the sound with different statistics and record from the awake rabbit in inferior colliculus and calculate the correlation coefficient for each recording for each sound that you can see from fire, bird, crowd, water, and snake. And these are the synthesized sound with different features that we have, a statistical feature, S1, and so on. Power spectrum, correlation, and other statistical feature. And also we play the original sounds to the rabbit and have a recording and calculate the correlation of neural responses. So as you can see here, if we have only one statistical feature, it's very hard to distinguish, for example, between fire, bird, and snake, as their correlation the neural responses, populational responses, are very similar. But as we add more statistics, we can actually distinguish, for example, between the fire and a snake, or all other actually natural sounds that we have, and they then become very closer to the responses becomes very closer to the original sounds. So, can neural correlation statistics be used to identify the sound? We test that using a minimum distance classifier. We use the 5 alternative force choice task to identify the sound using the neural responses, and use half of the data to build a template of the neural correlation matrix, and use the remaining data to validate the model performance. And we understand that neural population statistics, that is correlation statistics, in the inferior colliculus can be used to identify or recognize sounds. And categorization performance improves with the increasing population. So as you can see here, number of channels are also very important. When we have more frequency range, we increase the number of the channels, the accuracy rate increase. And also here on the x axis, it's not here though, but on the x-axis, we can see that by adding more statistical features, we will have more accurate data. The result of this actually research has had published in the PNAS. So you can look at the complete version of it at PNAS website. So as a summary, statistics are important for natural sound recognition using neural responses. Neural population statistics in the inferior colliculus can be used to identify or recognize the sound, and categorization performance improves when increasing the population size. So I would like to thank Professor Matthias Cabit, Professor Heather Reed, Professor Ian Stevenson, and other team members who are heavily work at University of Connecticut with a collaboration with the University of Pacific on these projects. And I would also would like to thank NSF and NIH to actually support these projects. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any question that you have.
Hi there. I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for the amazing presentation. And I have a couple of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have that many people around us, but I have a few questions. Maybe some people from the audience will relate to these questions. So the first question is, when we talk about words recognition, does really for our brain matter what kind of language do we speak? Does for our brain is important, what about the sound? We're talking about sound recognition in the auditory pathway, right? Does these things is actually differ for different languages? What do we know about how our brain actually responds to different languages?
Actually, it has been shown that, interestingly, the area that brain respond to the sound and the word and also speech, it's almost the same area for different languages. But actually, there are some researches, ongoing researches about the bilinguals, and the person who can actually talk more than one languages, then how it affects the brain. So the region usually the same, but actually it will be the researchers shows that it will be a little bit expanded and different for bilingual people. uh, so there is no actually exact answer to it because the research is still ongoing. It was a great question though.
Okay, so as understood, we basically now the regions that are responsible for sounds recognition, but we cannot differentiate, you know, the languages. It's only we only know which part responsible for the sound, but we don't know which exactly part responsible for, you know, for what kind of differences in terms of you know, sound recognition.
Yes, it has been shown that the brain region that is responsible for the actually processing the speech, it's a little bit different from the sound in general. So speech is different from the sound. This has been shown. But for different languages, actually, there are some studies are ongoing, specifically for bilingual persons to understand better that how bilingual can process actually speech in different languages.
That's very interesting subject matter. Okay, let's move forward to the next question. What do we know about relation to the aging? Does our audio, like the whole how brain listening is actually changes with time? Do we know anything about it?
Uh,
No.
it definitely it definitely changed, and actually, so for example, because language and speaking it's also related to the memory. So when aging happen, actually, we are usually lose some memory. So that can affect it definitely to how the brain process the language, and also from different point of view when we are aging, it has been shown that we cannot hear the high frequencies as our as actually as hair cells in the cochlea actually are damaged, so we cannot hear high frequencies. So these are part of the research that has been shown till now. But again, brain is the very complex organ of the body. Hearing also is very complicated. So there are a lot of research is ongoing. And we hope that we understand the brain and the hearing part better in future years.
I absolutely agree 100%. Another question is when you compare in your research human performance versus the network performance, the network that you developed, proposed, right? Uh, what kind of, can you please give us a little bit more details regarding when we're talking about human performance, what was this sample like, what kind of method been used, what kind of type of people been chosen for the research, because it's very interesting when you know, especially when you compare something, it's how we actually can relate on this data, just to get better idea how those measurements have actually been done. So when we're talking about human performance, who you mentioned in your presentation that you actually used known data. You took the data from available, right, from the previous researchers. Can you tell us a little bit more about what was behind of this data? What kind of data was it? Like what type of, what type of sound was the people?
So we would like to compare the model that we developed with some human performance, and then we found out the old actually research on human, specifically on children, that compare their goal was compare actually to the human performance for the normal hearing versus abnormal hearing or with a hearing loss. So they use the word recognition as well. So because of that, I put it there to compare it with our research.
Mm-hmm.
And they added some noise to the words and then play it to the children with normal hearing and without normal hearing. And then ask them to select the right word that they hear. And when they added more noise to the specific words, the perceptions actually going down, the word accuracy going down, because in the presence of the background noise, it's hard to hear very well. But it's not dropped a lot. So minus 5 dB is it means that the noise actual noise level is higher than the word level. So although on that situation, when the noise level is higher, subjects could hear the sound 60%, could actually recognize the sound and the word more than 60%. So imagine that now we have some noise. The noise level is much less than what we have our actually sound pressure level. Imagine that the noise level becomes higher. Still, subjects could hear that 60% of the time. So this is something that we are not seeing in modern automatic speech recognition. So in modern automatic speech recognition, usually the background noise should be less than what we have as a interest sound. So interestingly, we saw the similar thing in the model that we proposed. That even we use the minus 5 dB noise, it means that the sound level is the noise level is much higher than the original sound. The model can actually predict the sound and actually recognize the word that we gave it to it correctly around 60%. So we compared these two studies together because they used also the word and they used the high SNR, actually low SNR, sorry, low signal to noise ratio for recognizing the word.
Mm-hmm.
Could I answer?
Mm-hmm. So it was kids, for kids. It was made on kids.
Yes.
Right? Okay, on kids. Okay, I got it's very very interesting. So can you explain why those? We're talking about only specific like frequency. You know, for example, you've been developing your network on like 1.8 and 3 kilohertz. Can you please, because I'm not from this area, you know, obviously, but I do have, you know, good scientific background. Why this particular frequency? Can you please explain what behind of your choice? Why this particular frequency?
I just showed these two as an example. So the network has 53 actually nodes and neurons. So each neuron centered in a specific frequency. So in the slide, I just showed two examples of these two frequencies. It's repeated for the other frequencies as well. So I didn't select these two specific frequencies.
So there was not specific reason behind it. You just chosen, you know. And what the range of frequencies?
It's in the hearing range that we have, but we selected between 100 hertz to around around 7 kilohertz.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Understood. So okay, I got it. Another question, the last question about the correlations and statistics. I think it's very important. The the role of statistics in sound recognition. Because the thing is, you mentioned that, when we're talking about recognition of like images, it's easy, right? Because image is something, we don't have changes with the time. Image is very like simple to recognize. But when we're talking about a sound, there are lots of components involved, right? And you're mentioning a lot of times that you're using like some constant. Time is constant. You just you trying to simplify the model, the entire idea of auditory process. And for me, it was very interesting to hear and to see what kind of correlations you are actually using to basically bring up some sort of a picture for better recognition. My question is about application for AI purposes. From your perspective, for your perspective, do we currently have algorithm, AI, artificial intelligence, that would be somehow representative or closer to human actually sound recognition system? Just your perspective. You don't have to go too deeper into details. Yeah. What is your perspective basically on AI for sound recognition?
So there are a lot of algorithms for automatic speech recognition, and most of them doing very good when there are not background noise involved. And when there is a background noise, there is more. It's more challenging, and specifically background noise that the level is higher than the interest sound that we are hearing to that. And this is the goal of this project. When there is when as a human, when we are in a party, everyone is talking, the background noise is very high, we can hear. But if we put the AI there, it's really hard for the AI to actually recognize some speech. So then I believe there are one good actually algorithm, long-term short-term memory neural network that they use some biological feature actually to recognize the sounds, and it's very famous. But the other one, the deep neural network, they just try to do it automatically and with a high accuracy. But if something slightly changed, the noise changes, they are not able to recognize that. So because of that, it's important to do further research and develop more biologically inspired algorithm that actually do this task much better than AI that we have nowadays. And for example, if we can have some algorithm that bring the attention to the AI as well, because when we are talking to each other in a party, we actually actively have some attention to the person that we are talking. So that helps us to actually recognize the speech much better. So if we have some AI in future that incorporates some attention, some features from the auditory system itself, these algorithms hopefully work better than the algorithms that we have these days.
Okay, thank you. It was very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing with us your perspective. Well, thank you so much for your time. Again, it was a great pleasure to see you in person, and we hope to see you next year, 2024, for Human Brain Expo. So again, Fatemeh, thank you so much. It was super interesting, very involving. I'm sure a lot of people would, very thankful to hear this
Thank you so
information.
much, Gina. I appreciate this extra time and hope to see you next year.
Okay.